Hello, my name is Jack Heineke, and today's devotional comes from the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 15. He said, "Listen carefully, all you people of Judah, and you inhabitants of Jerusalem, and King Jehoshaphat. The Lord says this to you, be not afraid or dismayed at this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." And that's once again from 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 15. King Jehoshaphat, which is a name that I love to say, by the way, and the nation of Judah were under siege from the armies of three nations, which vastly outnumbered their army. They were in what we would call an impossible situation. By the way, life is filled with lots and lots of impossible situations that all of us face from time to time, where the outcome of the impossible situation is so far out of our hands that we don't really see how to cope with it and to deal with these impossible situations. Yes, it's popular to say on Facebook and on social media and to tell our friends that, well, you got this. I've been a drug and alcohol counselor, and I was a drug and alcohol counselor in the county jail where I live. And in that jail, I would hear from time to time people talking about their addiction, for instance, that had a large part as to why they were sitting in jail, that when they were going to leave the jail, that I got this figured out. I know how to control this addiction thing. I know how to do it better this time, which inevitably 99 times out of 100, they weren't able to fulfill that wish that I got this. The whole point of me saying I got this is that I don't believe that any of us, including myself, by the way, have got a whole lot of things under control in our lives. Now, to say that God has got this, I think that's a much more accurate statement than to say that I got this. For King Jehoshaphat, who was a godly king, by the way, and when you look at the nation of Israel and their lineage of kings, not all of the kings, and I'd say the vast majority of their kings were not what I would consider, or what anyone would consider to be a godly king. They were in it for their own purposes, basically. They weren't in it to honor God. But King Jehoshaphat was a godly man. He was a godly king. He understood his place, and he understood God's place. And he understood and knew when he needed to turn to and trust in God, which was every day pretty much for everything, quite frankly. But as being a godly king, he's faced with this impossible situation. There are three nations, three armies that are just across the border of his country. And this country is threatening to destroy King Jehoshaphat and his nation, therefore his people, which King Jehoshaphat doesn't want to have happen, which any good king wouldn't want to have happen, any people wouldn't want to have happen. As we see today in Ukraine, we see a whole nation of people that are undergoing a siege, a war that they didn't really ask for, from what I understand, that they don't want to have to leave their homes and on the road have them and their children being killed. It's just common sense. Nobody wants to go through that kind of ridiculous nonsense. But this was basically what King Jehoshaphat was facing with this very impossible situation. There were no resources at their disposal to overcome this great multitude and to rescue their families and their nation from this enemy. I'm not sure what the exact numbers were, but they were vastly, vastly outnumbered. They did not have an army. They didn't have the amount of soldiers, the military equipment to overthrow this siege done by these three different nations. Their world had become insane with those who opposed them. On their doorstep was the worst kind of bloodthirsty cancel culture you could imagine. These weren't people who were just calling for the cancellation of people to lose their jobs, their livelihoods. These were people who were wanting to cancel their very lives, the entire nation of Judah. So King Jehoshaphat did the only thing that any human can do when being faced with such an impossible situation. He prayed to God. He sought God. He sought the wisdom and the guidance of God on what to do to be a king that was going to lead his people to an unseeming victory. A victory that he could not see. And what was going on, as stated many times, is it was impossible for him to be able to see a favorable outcome to this dilemma he was being faced with. He wasn't about to tell himself or his people that they got this. He didn't send his people positive thoughts and good vibes. He prayed to God. So God answered and told them some extremely important words. He speaks through one of the prophets that's there in the crowd. King Jehoshaphat goes to God in prayer, and God speaks back to Jehoshaphat through one of the prophets. The words that they were told lots of words, but we can break it down and boil it down to, the battle is not yours, the battle is God's. How often, how many times do we pick up our weapons of defense, which could just be verbal weapons of defense, or sitting at our computers typing away words on social media to defend our stance against an attack, either real or imagined? Pretty much every time. How many times instead do we actually turn to God and seek His guidance, His counsel, His wisdom before we start typing on Facebook and asking for help from friends, from other human beings on Facebook? When really it should just be the other way around. We should automatically be Christians or be people of God who automatically know who it is we need to turn to in the moment of distress, in the moment of facing an overwhelming, impossible situation. If you, like most of us in this world, have faced addiction with yourself or with your own family, for instance, you've faced an impossible situation, and you've probably done everything you could within your resources to rectify, to repair the situation, to just get your child into rehab, for instance. But the problem is that rehab doesn't fix addiction. It can give an addict the tools to overcome their addiction, but it can't fix them. And there's nothing wrong with sending people to rehab either, by the way. But after many times of doing this, and it basically failing because the addict just wants to continue to use, you're running into an impossible situation with someone's self-will, and it's someone who you love very dearly. It's your child. So of course you want what's best for them. But really, the one we all need to turn to whenever we're facing any impossible situation is God. And that's exactly what happened here. And God responded and said, guess what? This battle, these three armies on your border, this is not your fight. God says, this is my fight. In fact, God did not have them send their army out at all. But the next morning, He sent out the worship team. He sent out the musicians and the singers the next morning to the front lines of the battle. Right there at the border were the musicians and the singers singing praise and worship to God. No army, no weaponry, no way to defend themselves other than God Himself. As the worship team worshiped God in song, God just did His thing. And He had the three armies destroy themselves. They attacked one another. It doesn't tell us what caused the attack between one another other than God just had them take a look at one another, find fault with something that was going on, and next thing you know, they're fighting one another, and they completely destroyed themselves. There was not a survivor left. Completely destroyed themselves. And therefore, the only thing that King Jehoshaphat and the people of Judah were able to raise up were not weapons, but their voices in song and worship of God. You see, when we worship God in song or worship God just in our obedience, like worship God through prayer and worship God through acknowledging God as being God, miraculous things can happen. Does it guarantee that He will overcome the army and fight that battle for you? Not necessarily. But it's a good chance that He will. It's a good chance that He'll tell you, guess what? This thing that is taken over your mind and this battle that's going on with you in your mind that you think you have to be in control of, that you think you have to make this outcome occur that you want to occur, God says, that battle's not your battle. It's my battle. Let me be God and you be you. Now, I don't know what personal or social or health or wealth or sin battles that you face right now, but the chances are that if you're up and alive and breathing, you're facing at least one or two of those types of battles in your life. All of us face battles. And as I said earlier, my first response is probably just like your first response, is to grab the nearest thing and just start swinging. But then God reminds me, Jack, the battle is not yours. The battle is God's. When I was separated from my first wife many years ago, I found myself in a friend's basement who opened his basement up for me in a small little room down there to basically restart my life because of the separation and the impending divorce that did happen. And I was in a very dark place, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Very difficult place. But I was attending church. I was a worship leader at a church in Baltimore. And I thank God for that, because those kind of things, those activities actually helped pull me through that dark, difficult time. But it was during that dark, difficult time, as I was reading the Bible, that I first encountered this passage in the book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 20. The first time I read about King Jehoshaphat and his nation being under siege by this impossible situation of these three armies. And I'm reading this, and God is speaking to me about my separation, my impending divorce. Basically what God told me is that Jack, this battle's not yours. This battle is mine. There's been many, many battles I've faced since then. I'm facing battles right now. That's just kind of how life is. But God is always reminding me that, Jack, that battle's not yours. It's mine. I was going through my own personal battles with myself, quite frankly, probably about 7-8 months ago, and God showed me that also, was that was not my battle to fight, but that it was God's. And God restored me from that battle into, once again, being placed in another church, on another worship team, being ministered to by people at this church who are about as godly a people as I've ever encountered on this earth. They're not perfect, they're human, but they do love God, and they've shown me and my family tremendous, tremendous love that has been blowing my mind. So God is always telling us all the time, these battles are not our battles to fight, but they're God's battles. So instead of swinging, how about singing? Just praise and worship God and sit back and watch what happens next. I pray and I hope that you have an awesomely blessed day.